hosting the meeting here in East Tennessee, where our stakeholders will be able to ask questions.
You're welcome, and we thought that was important to have a meeting here in East Tennessee, because I know no secret to anybody in the room here, this is kind of a hot spot for this issue over here right now, and we just felt it was important to come over here to give you a chance of coming to a meeting. East Tennesseans a chance to come to the meeting without having to drive the 4 or 5 hour round trip to Nashville. So with that, we'll get started on the agenda. First, we'll hear an update from TWRA and Mr. Cole Hardy. Cole, if you would please come forward, and I guess over here at the podium. And I think you're going to give us an update on the T-CHIP program and a couple other things. So Cole, you're recognized.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, I'm good. Okay. I wanted to give just a brief update on where we're at with the T-CHIP program. For those unfamiliar, it's our Tennessee Carp Harvest Incentive Program. It's being implemented over on Kentucky and Barkley reservoirs largely, but also includes waters of Pickwick Reservoir, Old Hickory Reservoir, and Cheatham Reservoir. We incentivize commercial anglers and wholesale fish dealers to remove invasive carp. And so far, the program began back in September of 2018. And since its inception, we've harvested over 26.5 million pounds of carp, largely out of Kentucky and Barkley reservoirs. So that program is proceeding along. They're still pulling a lot of fish out of the water. These past couple of years alone, it's been right up around 7 to 8 million pounds of carp. That's it for a T-CHIP update. If you have questions.
I'm sorry, Cole, let's see if anybody's got any questions on the T-CHIP program. I can tell you one that came up a few weeks ago that Mr. Tumlin sitting beside me brought to me, and one of them, let's just go ahead and cover that here at a public meeting as well, about where we're at with capacity. If the feds were able to or the state were able to put in a couple more $1 million, is there the capacity out there in the commercial market, and I guess the capability within the commercial fishing community to do that, or is it the money that we have now sufficient for the market forces that are there using the carp product?
That's a good question, Mike. The capacity out there right now seems to be adequate for our program. We are funded right now at $1.5 million, and we make that request annually from the federal projects that we put in for. Those come from the sort of base funding for Fish and Wildlife Service. It's what funds a lot of the projects that we have ongoing. So,
and if you would remind me and remind anybody who's here and any member of the public who may be watching online as well, this federal program, or this federal, I'm calling it a program, maybe a better word for it. This federal program is about roughly how many million a year, and how is it divided? What states, I guess, compete for that money?
Right. So last year it was funded at $31 million, and that $31 million goes to Fish and Wildlife Service for them to implement their invasive carp work, and for them to distribute out to the states in the Mississippi River basin. So the states within each of the Mississippi River sub-basins, which there are 6 of, essentially compete. It's probably not the right word. We come together. We look through project proposals and work out as a partnership where the funding needs to go. Okay.
And this money is appropriated annually, and unlike I know some other monies that we're going to be talking about shortly, it seems like money may be authorized or talked about but never appropriated. This money has been appropriated annually now for a number of years. Is that correct?
It has, and it started out lower, as things typically do, and approached that 25 million mark, and it stayed there for I believe a couple of years, and then just this past year we had that little bit of an increase up to 31 million. We're not exactly sure where things are going to fall out here in the coming year. It could be back down to the 25. It could be at that continuing level of 31. But we'll see.
Are there limits on what this money can be spent on, or criteria for what this money can be spent on?
There are. And so when I talk about that 31, like I said, a portion of that stays with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service for them to implement their CARP programs. And so at the $25 million level, I think it was about 14 million that combined that went out to all the states that put in for those funds. With the most recent plus up to 31, it's been a little bit more than that. That's gone out to the states, but it's limited to things like removal projects. So that's the bulk of what we request funding for. It goes to our carp harvest incentive program. We also fund some of the monitoring efforts that we have ongoing, and some of the research to look at fish movement. And so that's similar sort of projects are what most of the states that request this funding use it for.
Okay. Before Cole moves on to the next subject, any further questions on the T-CHIP program? All right, seeing none, Cole?
I guess I just want to note to make sure I was clear, for where our T-CHIP program is at right now, we seem to have adequate funding. We're not hitting limits where people are restricted and have to stop fishing. If we do run into that sort of situation where the capacity that the commercial fishermen have greater ability to harvest fish than we have to reimburse for, then that's something that in the next round of funding we can go and request additional funding for in future years out. But we sort of can determine if that's a need from year to year and request that in our funding.
Okay.
So,
all right. Thank you.
Okay.
Yep.
And then I also wanted to provide a little bit of an update from a micro perspective, some of the things that are being worked on and that you may have heard of here lately. So these funds that we use, the funding that's set aside for the deterrent, the pilot project that the Corps has going on, which we'll hear more about, are authorized under WRDA, so Water Resources Development Act. And we heard several times in the past and a couple times here today that there's been $25 million authorized under that project, but that funding has not yet been appropriated. And so something that MICRA as an organization does when they go to Washington, D.C. and express, here's where things are at, here are some needs that we have. One of the needs that they'll be expressing and are requesting are that the funding for that legislation, that authorization, be increased from $25 million up to $50 million. Of course, that's everything's dependent also on that money being appropriated as well, but that'll kind of comes a little with time.
And Cole, if I understand it right, I'm trying to think of the timeline of the congressional sessions. If WRDA is not appropriated, if this money is not appropriated by the end of this year, we start all over again from the beginning and come January, don't we? Since we're starting a new congressional session at that time, I think does WRDA have to go back and be reauthorized? Now we've got money authorized but not appropriated. But if I understand it right, after January we have to go all the way back through the process again.
So WRDA is revisited every other year. It's
okay.
Revisited on a every other year sort of cycle. That money is authorized, and I believe it remains that way within the legislation. I think through 2024.
Okay.
I'd have to get back into the legislative language to look at that specifically, okay. But if I'm not mistaken, I think in out years they may be able to introduce appropriations bills to that separately. So it's just because it's not necessarily a WRDA year where it's revisited doesn't mean that in an off year that some funding could be authorized or appropriated for it.
Okay.
And then, so the kind of third thing I really wanted to make sure and touch on is there's been some discussion of Mississippi River Basin Fisheries Commission. And you may have heard of a Great Lakes Fisheries Commission. There's more examples of this out there. And this would provide a really awesome opportunity within the Mississippi River Basin for work to be done on all sorts of fisheries issues, interjurisdictional fisheries management, recreational and commercial fisheries. So a lot of opportunities potentially with this for funding and for large scale partnership sort of projects down the line. Now, that right now is in a sort of proposed legislation sort of state, I guess. It's something that they're considering under WRDA and would likely be administered through the Department of the Interior. And the way that this would kind of play out, if approved and passed as it's proposed, would be sort of a 3-year kind of ramp up, where an initial year would look like $1 million to establish some of the positions and that to administer the commission. There would be a second year where partial funding of $30 million is proposed, and then third year, I'm assuming, like, kind of imagining this is more of a full funding. We talk about things being fully funded sometimes and then end up with more funding. It's kind of how the invasive carp plan is. It was considered fully funded at $25 million, but then we got an extra $6 million for it. So,
Cole, is this something that I know Mark Thurman and Frank Fiss, who've been involved with this a lot longer than you have as well. Not that just that I know Mark was at the micro meeting a couple months ago, and he and Frank had another commitment prevented them from being here today. But this is a question I guess I could have asked Mark, or you may know the answer to it. Would it help? I know Micro's working on this, but would it help? And could you get us the entity, whether it's our congressional delegation, if it's our congressional delegation, both the Senate and the House members, somebody I can find the contact information for, but who could we email and send a letter to as a commission encouraging this federal legislation?
I can definitely get that information for you. I don't have it offhand, but I can work with the micro folks and get you that information.
Okay.
And it's something just to
go ahead. I'm sorry.
I think kind of you were leading with that question too, is this is something that would be really big for the Mississippi River Basin, all the states, and multiple aspects of different fisheries issues, not just invasive carp, right? And so it would be a really important thing to try to pursue in our perspective. But in the near term, we're talking at least 3 years out before this thing would be funded if it's passed this go around. And so in the near term, short term, it's probably not a lot of help for things like deterrence immediately and stuff like that.
Right. I understand. And this, Dennis, if I remember right, we discussed this maybe at the last meeting about this basin would be an entity that could receive money directly from the feds. Isn't that right? As opposed to kind of what we're doing now, where it kind of goes through the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And then, as you said, they filter off some for their programs, and then we've got 14 million to split among the states. But this other entity, this Lower Mississippi River Basin Authority, if that would be its name, could then ask for direct appropriations from Congress. I'm trying to remember some of those discussions we had at the last meeting, but I think that's what we talked about.
That it rings a bell. I'm not 100% sure. I'd have to get back at the proposed legislation for that one. I'm familiar enough to know that it would alleviate some of the current hurdles with working with that appropriation to Fish and Wildlife and through those various channels.
Okay. We don't have to take a formal vote, but I would ask the commission a question. And if you, would it be okay with the commission members if we find out who this letter needs to go to? If I send a letter on behalf of the commission to our, be it our federal delegation or to whatever entity, to whatever group that Cole can figure out that would be best to send this to, encouraging the creation of this basin authority. Anybody, Bob?
I want to go back to your earlier question. You
Sure.
asked, is there something that the Senate, the House in Tennessee could do? Is there a way we could request a senator to the House to pass a resolution to send a letter to the Appropriations Commission up in DC to accelerate funding through WRDA for potential barriers?
Absolutely. In fact, we got a representative here who'd probably be happy to carry a resolution at the State House requesting help for federal funding for the Carp program. I'm sure that's something that we, of course, the legislature, I'm still saying we, I'm not in the legislature anymore, but the legislature does not go back in session until January, but that is something that I'm sure we could get some language together for them. And Representative Fritz and whether it be Senator Yeager or one of the other senators who live along the river, I'm sure would be more than happy to sponsor a resolution requesting federal help for those appropriations. Absolutely, that's a great idea.
Mike, if I might add, it could be timely. The micro visit to the Hill typically takes place mid-February. So that's a time when they'll send a delegation to talk largely about fisheries issues and micro issues, including invasive species. So that may be something good to share with them by that time.
And Mr. Chairman, in the meantime, I think it would be good for the commission to send that letter.
Okay. All right. All right. Any more questions for Cole? Dennis, Mr. Tumlin, informal here, Dennis.
You're good, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. A couple of quick questions, Cole. At the last meeting, we talked a little bit about a potential Pickwick buying station under the T-CHIP program. I wasn't sure if you had an update on Pickwick, if it has any progress. And number two, at one time on infrastructure, there was a conversation around the need for a flash freezer out there in West Tennessee to help with the bait market. Do you have any updates or needs there on those two topics? Thank you.
So as far as the Pickwick buying station goes, that was something that we were looking at trying to get set up. I think there were some interested parties looking at setting up a wholesale fish dealer operation down there. I don't believe that's landed at this point. Some of the existing commercial buyers did go down to Pickwick and caught some fish down there. And I think that their intent will be to continue to get down there when they have a chance. It's just a little far out, and that's why we'd like to see something at Pickwick. But for now, there's nothing established there. As far as the flash freezer, I'm not familiar, not recalling that one. I'm not familiar. We did provide the commercial incentives, the grants, to multiple of the wholesale fish dealers, and they were able to build some freezer space in that improved their capacity. And the Fish and Wildlife Commission did that. As far as another freezer location, there's nothing in the works that we have anyway.
Yeah, I think that's what it was. Just limited freezer space at some of the producers,
Yeah.
and had reached out about potential grants, and it sounds like that has been addressed.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any further questions for Mr. Harding? Seeing none, Cole, thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. All right, next we have an update from the Corps. Mr. Wiley, you're recognized. I think you may have some slides for us. but you're recognized.
I did. Thank you, Mr. Bell. And again, I would like to echo Mr. Desee's comments and thank you for having it here in East Tennessee for some of our stakeholders that we don't get to see as often. So for those of you that have listened to past meetings, I've been on the advisory commission for around 2 years, and I've given some briefings on Section 509, the legislation. And I'm not going to do a deep dive into the regulations and legislation, but I will, as I talk about the status and where we are and where we're going. I do think it's important to touch on a little bit of just sort of give a little bit of the framework of the legislation. As you know, in 2020, the Corps was identified as a lead agency under Section 509 WRDA for a pilot program to manage and prevent spread of invasive carp. In conjunction with TVA and other relevant federal agencies, the study area was initially set in the Cumberland and Tennessee watershed, or in 2022, the 10 Tom or the Tom Bigby watershed was added. So the scope of the geographic scope of the study area got larger. As Cole had alluded to, the legislation identified up to $25 million to be appropriated. We've had a little bit of money appropriated to get us started in our planning phase, but largely those monies are approved, not yet appropriated. So a couple of things to remember here, a couple of big items. For the initial project cost, construction, design, engineering, et cetera, a maximum amount federal government can contribute to 75%, which would leave us needing a non-federal partner, a non-federal sponsor before we can go forward with projects. At this time, a non-federal sponsor has not been identified, so that's something we're going to continue to work toward in the coming months. The O&M, the operations and maintenance of projects once they're put on the ground would be 100% federal. So a couple of those items for the framework as we go forward. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm sorry if I could interrupt you. I don't know if anybody else has any questions, but I do have one. Going back to that past slide on the, I know, and my memory tells me in the years past, we've looked at just estimates of what a what a deterrent would cost. And I know it depends on the dam, depends on the location of the barrier. Maybe somewhere, are we still looking at somewhere between $6, $9, $10 million? Do you have any idea?
Depending on the measure that we do. For example, if it's a underwater acoustic system, maybe it's a little less where you don't have the compressors and things like that. For a bath, it's probably in that neighborhood. Okay. Depending on the location, you know, like Wilson Lock, for example, areas where you have 2 locks, that's going to be more expensive. Right. More speakers, more lights, more facilities, more compressors. It really depends on the site. But that's probably in the neighborhood.
And the reason I asked this question, so if we're looking at, I know one of the things that you have to do is identify a non-federal sponsor. So if we're looking at maybe trying to get the state to be that non-federal sponsor, we've got a meeting coming up pretty soon that I know at least 2 of us on this at this table are going to be at, and the representative who's here in person are going to be meeting with the governor in the next few weeks, and we just want to try to give him an idea of if the state would become that non-federal partner, how much would we need them to commit to? And I know it would again vary depending on where the project was. I'm sure Kentucky Lake or Kentucky Dam would be, oh, it's not a Pickwick Dam, would be a lot different than Nickajack Dam. Correct. But we are going to sit down and meet with the governor face to face, and would like to have some figure to throw out there to the governor to commit to. So I don't know if that's something maybe if you couldn't necessarily answer right now, maybe something in the next within the next week, maybe you and I can correspond back and forth, because we are going to be meeting with them, and I don't think there'd be any more natural non-federal sponsor than the state, which has an interest in this as well. Correct. And so the best sources for that type of information, Fish and Wildlife recently put out an open file report for the BAF to sort of cover
their study period of 3 years. In that, it has a listing of the funding and sort of a breakdown of the funds for construction, rough O&M costs. USGS also put out an open file report recently for their underwater acoustic system that has the same type of information. So I'd certainly be happy to meet with you and sort of go over what they had there. Of course, things might be a little more expensive now than they were, a couple of years ago, 3 years ago, and those systems were a little bit different, but would certainly be happy to go over those costs with you.
I've got a little construction project going on in my house. I can tell you things are a lot more expensive now than they were a couple of years ago.
Right.
Yeah.
So this is, here we go. Initially, we start out Cumberland River, Tennessee River. We have 4 main stem locations on the Cumberland to consider, 9 on the Tennessee River main stem, 10 if you count Melton Hill on the Clinch. A lot of options there, right? And then when you add the 10 Tom in, this is the Tong-Bigby watershed south of us. The legislation was more tied to the upper northern portion, the 10 Tom that connects the Tom-Bigby and the Tennessee River. So although there are some constraints in the legislation where there be funding and some things that were added in, very large geographic scope and very broad legislation, unlike some legislation that says you'll start construction here and it'll be at this site, or it has more guidance given. It's sort of to the agencies to make these decisions on where the projects are best suited, and also what type of projects as we get further down the line with a non-federal partner.
I hate that I'm the only person asking questions, guys, but I do have another one because it just
Sure.
it just came to me again. So I know that there's no specific legislation, as you said. There's no legislation that says one barrier's got to one deterrent's got to be at Kentucky Lake, one deterrent's got to be at Nickajack Lake, one deterrent's got to be at Wilson. There is some, if I remember right, though, my reading, it's been a couple weeks since I read it. There is some language, though, that talks about how the Corps, I think that charges the Corps to report back to Congress on the effectiveness of the barriers.
That's correct. I'll get to that in a second. I was going to answer that one, but no, it's a great question, and I'll sort of go through it. But there are some sort of details in Section 509 that I'll cover in a minute. But for right now, where we are, as people are asking about the status, we're trying to take this very large footprint with all these options and narrow, work with our stakeholders, our public stakeholders, be it nonprofits, members of the public, and navigation interests, for example, and also our federal and state agencies. So last year, in the fall, we sent out a scoping notice to solicit those comments, so that we could sort of see what ideas were out there and draw from the experience of all these different stakeholders. We've had a chance to sort of go through those, and have continued to receive input from several stakeholder groups that sort of sent information, sent their thoughts. So we continue to monitor that. As well, we started work this year with an interagency group to help us with those decisions, to narrow that sort of scope down. And in interagency groups, we have the state wildlife agencies, USGS, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, those representatives that have monitoring and telemetry data, that know more about populations, about movements, incorporating lockage rates, et cetera, and doing some modeling, doing some consolidation of our information to first identify the best spots for these projects. That was my ask of the group when we started, was to start out with the from a river system perspective and the constraints of Section 509, where do you feel like are the best spots? And that will sort of help us with our other foundational pieces, including what non-federal sponsors would be available based on the preferred locations. So given the public and stakeholder comments, we will at some point later this year, receive some feedback from the interagency group recommending a starting point, a starting sequence, and that'll sort of help us along with the other inputs to get started with identifying the best measures, a non-federal sponsor to help us out, and hopefully get going in the right path towards starting a project. After we get feedback from our interagency group, we will build a programmatic EA around that, around our comments, around the interagency group recommendation that will cover sort of broadly the baseline conditions of our resources and also the input we received and what we're looking at going forward. In other words, it'll consider the environmental effects as the program as a whole and not so narrowly like if we put this measure here, because until we have a non-federal sponsor, we really can't with certainty say exactly what's going to happen. There are funding constraints depending on the sponsor that will play in. So that's our first step in narrowing this geographic scope to a path forward. Talking about the interagency group specifically and what we're working on, there are two sort of asks, I guess. One specifically is for feedback specifically for our process for 509, dealing with the 509 legislation, the pilot program, and what makes sense given those considerations for this legislation. Also, they're working on more long-term and holistic plan for the river system for any other actions or legislations that may come down, just a long-term planning framework for the Tennessee and Cumberland and TENTOM outside maybe of Section 509. So for phase one, the initial considerations, the initial analysis that I had asked for to help inform our decision under Section 509, I gave them a few considerations. One is that we will consider Lake Barkley in with the sites, with the other sites on the three river systems. The BAF was a Fish and Wildlife project, is a Fish and Wildlife project with the 3-year study period. That period is coming to an end. So the long-term status and funding being not totally concrete right now, I had them include Barkley as a potential site with the other ones, and that differs a little bit from the analysis that was done for TVA. Another consideration is that this was taken directly from the legislation 22, is that the legislation says pretty clearly not fewer than one project shall be on the TENTOM waterway. So that says to me, any plan that we have going forward at some point in the sequence, there needs to be a project considered or a project put in on the TENTOM. That part of the legislation was pretty straightforward to me, so that was another consideration I gave the group. Also in the legislation, as you had alluded to, we are responsible for reporting to Congress, and we have a mandate to report the results of the pilot program, including of the analysis of the effectiveness of the technologies, methods, and measures, et cetera. So the interpretation was that the project should be located in areas that already had some level of existing population so that we could test those technologies. And in reading the legislation, it's clear to me, or my interpretation was that there was a testing component, sort of like the BAF, the UADS, et cetera, which also used similar criteria for their testing and pilot program. So that was a consideration I gave for the group as well, to give feedback in that it's going to be hard for us to report effectiveness or evaluate effectiveness of these measures if there are no subjects to evaluate or test.
Again, if you put it at Nickajack, where we don't have a population in Gunnersville, I know there's occasional fish found there, but not a population. You don't have anything to test it with. I'm just restating this as you said it, but that legislation seems to limit it to where we know the fish are at.
That was our interpretation. And, to me, it doesn't have to be at the spots where it's most populous necessarily, but at least when considering putting in for management of the populations, there at least has to be enough so that we can carry out that mandate, because that is one of the things that's asked of us under the legislation. And you guys have seen this map. This is a map of the populations on the Tennessee and the Cumberland from the 2020 TWRA report for documented occurrences of silver carp. Okay. And also, I continue to, stay in touch with Cole and with Josh in Kentucky, as well as the Alabama and Mississippi guys on their calls to, make sure we have the most recent data as far as populations go on the 10 Tom, on the Tennessee and the Cumberland. So just to summarize everything we talked about, right now, my focus is on working with the interagency group and giving them the feedback they need to complete their process and give a recommendation. Also, while considering, information coming in from other stakeholders to a path forward, that will help us ultimately identify, make a decision on the best place to start, identify a non-federal sponsor, and get off the ground. So as we've alluded to a couple of times, once we have that spot, and as an agency, we feel comfortable about the starting point and the best place to start and best sequence to start, we can start making some of the decisions you talked about and work with our non-federal sponsors to make those decisions, including like what are dimensions of the lock, what are the lockage rates. For example, if carbon dioxide was on the table, every time you lock, there's an additional charge. So maybe for areas with higher lockage rates, that's a more expensive option than one that isn't as sensitive to lockages. Boater safety, existing fisheries, etc. We will work through in a smaller like TRDA once we have our starting point and our sequence. Another thing to remember is sort of the timeline in term of the pilot project, the pilot program. From a funding perspective, the legislation says that, it'll be funded through appropriations to remain available until they're spent. So when the money is gone, the program's gone, essentially. And this would likely include operation and maintenance, not just construction costs. So we have to think through the process as we go of this, this project that, we select first. What's the construction? What's the O&M? And how much does that limit us into maybe a second project or, a third? And so those are all things that we're sort of trying to think through. And once we get our starting point and get a non-federal sponsor, it's certainly something we'll work through with them to not only start an initial pilot project, but also through the program in general as those funds hopefully become appropriated. And that's all I have.
Mr. Tumlin, you're recognized.
Yeah, I heard Travis cover this a couple of weeks ago on the monthly Asian Carp Professionals call, and I appreciate him covering it here. Travis, any idea on timeline? Are you able to talk anything about you've done a great job detailing out all that has to be done, but do you have any idea on proposed timelines? Thank you.
A lot of that will depend on us being able to acquire a non-federal sponsor. Hopefully that lines up, in sequence as we go through the process. We're scheduled to get some input from the interagency team not too far in the future, within the next couple of months. We'll at that point, we'll get a document finalized, and we have to go through a review process through the Corps. So we have to get buy-in from our division in Cincinnati and also through headquarters. There's going to be some modeling associated with the USGS effort to get us some feedback. We have to certify that modeling. So those things will sort of take us through most of 24. Hopefully, through that time and concurrently with that time, we can start identifying a non-federal sponsor and start getting the groundwork laid there. So looking at probably, and Stephen or Valerie, if you guys want to correct me here, feel free if I say something wrong, but if we are able to secure a non-federal sponsor, if funds become appropriated in the future, hopefully we could start design after that, maybe in 25, and potentially get a project in 26 sometime. So it's going to be a process that isn't happening right away, obviously, but we want to make sure that when we do expend those funds and start work, that we're doing it in the right way that'll benefit the system as a whole.
Any further questions? Seeing none, Travis, thank you for the update from CORE, and I'll now recognize Mr. Desee, and I don't know if you have anything to add or to update from TDA, but if you do, we're here to hear from you, Mr. Desee.
Okay, good afternoon. Not too much since our last meeting. Our last meeting, we did identify the required permitting for a bioacoustic fish fence, and I work with TDEC on that. So we clearly know what permits would be needed once we're ready to pull the trigger on a system. TVA, we continue to monitor and collect data and support our partners, whether it's the TWRA or the CORE, with data. And our most recent surveys that we've conducted here in East Tennessee, I'll call it a sport fish survey or fish surveys, hadn't seen any silver carp that we've uncovered from our last surveys. And that's all I have to report.
All right, any questions for Mr. Desee? Seeing none, completes our time for updates from the different partners. We've been contacted by Mr. Ron Berry. Ron, now Ron, have I got you as chairman of the Carp Committee for Roane County or chairman of the Roane County Commission?
So I'm actually chairman of the Roane County Carp Committee,
Okay.
currently president of the Tennessee County Services Association, which is county commissioners, and South Region Director for NACO, which is the National Association of Counties. So the Mississippi Basin is under ours with the with NACO. I appreciate you having
Well,
this today.
yeah, let me just say, we appreciate you coming today. Appreciate the correspondence and the relationship we've had with you in the past. Look forward to that continuing, and really appreciate your representative behind you, Representative Fritz, being here with us today and contacting his office, contacting me, and putting us together so you'd have this opportunity to address the commission.
Thank you very much, and I as well appreciate him being here today.
And his lovely wife, and
his
I've already
wife.
forgotten her name,
That's
but
right.
his lovely
That's right.
wife as well. So,
I go back about 6 years ago when we were first talking about the invasive species silver carp. We appointed a commission committee at that point in time from Roane County, and from that, the Watts Bar Ecology Group evolved, and they've done tremendous. Spent hours and hours and hours, and a lot of money and expense and stuff to try to keep up with all of this. I go back also to a September 21st, 2021 meeting that we finally got the partners together. Mr. Desee was there. We had a meeting in Rockwood. Cole Hardy was there, I think, and some others that are here. And it seems like from 6 years ago to 2 years ago to today, we're still scrambling the same eggs, I guess, over and over and over again. And I guess to me, prevent or control, I guess, would be how I would classify everything we've done. The $25 million was allocated, I think, in the Water Resource Development Act of 2020. I had an opportunity 2 years ago as a NACO representative to meet with Speaker Pelosi. And I asked her, she asked, what's the concern in Tennessee? And I said, well, Madam Speaker, the $25 million that's on your desk is for Silver Carp is our number one priority. And she came out to address us, and she said, I've heard everything from Silver Carp. And so we made a point, but we haven't released any money yet. So I failed on that point. But that's I think how far back that money goes. Mr. Tumlin is well aware of the position that we're in Roane County, having been the main man in Ray County that started us on a fishing tournament program. We just spent $250,000 of our ARP money, which was the government free money, expanding our parking so that we could have bigger tournaments with his help. We spent thousands of other monies on tourism. And I'm afraid that what we're going to see is we're going to see all of this tourism vanish, which if we do in tourism, I think it was the third largest industry in the state, and went to 2 last year. So, and our tourism money is $755 per person in Roane County. That's the return that we get on our investment. So we're making a wise investment, except for the fact that we just had $11 million investment in a campground on the lake. And I'm afraid that we're going to, if we're not careful, we're going to, if we control and we do what's happening in Kentucky Lake, where you've got 26 million pounds thus far, that's going to drive our tourism away. Right now, my property assessor tells me, because I live on the lake, that I'm paying about 30% more on my property tax than the person who doesn't live on the lake. So if I lose that and that property devalues as it's valued now because of that proximity to the lake, then we've got 3,220 homes in Roane County on the lake. We've got 750 miles of shoreline. That TVA values at $1 million a mile. That's not our numbers, and that's not including the economic. TVA has spent billions of dollars in East Tennessee and in Roane County. We're very, very appreciative of everything they've done to us. We would not be in a position that we're in. We would not have Malibu boats just moving into East Tennessee and Roane County had it not been for TVA. And again, the water. So you've got also Von Orr, where you've got the boat manufacturing capital probably. Sea Ray just closed, and so we've got that to combat. That's why this Silver Carp thing is, if we're going to control it, then I'm afraid we're going to lose so much. And getting back to Roane County, just today's numbers, and what real estate values have done. This was 2 years ago. We would need $3.5 million of increased property tax to stay even if that lake property is devalued, like the assessor says it's 30%. So those are the things that are really concerning to us. We've got I think you got a letter from Dr. Rasmussen who's fought this for years and years. And if you look at the Great Lakes Basin, evidently they decided to prevent them because they closed the lock. And as I understand it from reading, these Asian carp were within 3 miles of Chicago of getting into the Great Lakes, and so they prevented any of that getting into that 2,300 mile lake up there. So if we could try to control it and don't try to prevent it, it just seems to me that we're going to lose a lot of valuable assets that we have. We're going to lose the money that TVA has poured into our East Tennessee region. You just stop and think what from Chattanooga up to Knoxville on the lake would mean if all you saw were Asian carp and no fishing. The fishing tournaments are becoming huge. I think someone can attest just what it meant to Ray County, just in Ray County, and it's spinning over to us. I think Dr. Rasmussen's report would tell you that, there's the best way to do it is to put the barrier at Watts Bar. That way we're in front of them, and this 4-lake region then would be preserved and pristine without the carp. Like I say, we started this 6 years ago. I really think we're running out of time, guys. And I'm not sure next week what we can tell the governor. I mean, we can give him all of this information, but what do we tell him we're going to do? I don't know that we've got an answer yet as to if the commission had to make an appointment today or a statement. I'm not sure what that would have to be, but our time is running out. I know it takes legislation to close a lock. I think we've got precedents from the lock being closed in Minnesota. So I just think there's ways to do it. We're just asking for as much help as you can give us. A lot of these numbers, and it looks like from Kentucky Lake. Okay.
Can I ask something real quick?
Sure.
Let me have you contacted Fleischman and Burchett and asked them to introduce legislation to shut the lock?
Yes, sir.
What is their response?
Let me respond. I'm not sure that we've talked to them about closing the lock and the importance of the lock.
Okay.
I'm not sure we've actually sent them anything requesting, but they are aware of the importance of closing the lock.
And they are the guys that could introduce legislation tomorrow to do it.
That's right. That's correct.
And I mean, I would,
and that's a stumbling block.
I would encourage you to do that.
That's a stumbling block we've had. I've had 5 or 6 personal conversations with Congressman Fleischman, and some others have had conversations with Representative Burchett.
Yep.
So we have had those. We've had conversations with our senators.
Yeah.
At the same time with all of this, and I guess that's the frustrating part is we can continue to have conversations and we can continue to request and ask, but at the same time we're not getting where we need to be in terms of moving. And I think in getting to where you can make a recommendation as to where we wanted to be to get back to the governor. So those are complicated problems that we've got. We thought it was important to go outside and get expert folks who followed this for 30 years. And that was Dr. Rasmussen. And we hope that you got his report and that the proper folks have been able to see that and what he recommended. So we bore you with any more of our time. I appreciate you being here, and I appreciate you giving us the opportunity to speak to you. And again, thanks to Representative Fritz for being here today. And I know he's doing all he can do in Nashville to get us. In fact, I think he was able to get us the meeting with the governor. So we look forward to meeting you with you there, and any help that you can give us. It only benefits us. It benefits TVA, and this whole region is basically today based off of tourism on the lakes. I think at our last county commission convention, your tourism commissioner was there, and every slide we looked at was a lake. And after it was over, I said, "We're going to have to change your slides." And he said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, we don't have any carp jumping in the water. We're going to, those pristine lakes aren't going to get us the same results." So that's what we're looking for. I appreciate you. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Berry. All right. Are there any further comments any of the commission members would like to make? Well, seeing that, then we are adjourned.
No, Mr. Joseph. I would like to address the commission, please.
And
I think you said this is for a public, the public has.
And Dr. Joseph, I wish you would have contacted the commission prior to the meeting and could have made sure I got you on there. But Dr. Joseph, I tell you what, out of consideration, I'll give you 3 minutes. So you had 3 minutes, Dr. Joseph. And Dr. Joseph, let me say something. I served 16 years in the legislature and received a lot of contact from constituents over that time. And rarely have I seen somebody as caustic as you in your communications. You've even attacked some people personally. If I hear any personal attacks today, your mic will be cut off. So you have 3 minutes.
Each of you were sent a letter from me concerning TWRA's response to Mike McCracken's letter. You saw it. In that letter, TWRA said, and I quote, "The continued insistence that TWRA is following the U.S. Fish and Wildlife micro guidance laid out in the national plan is not following it is their words categorically false." I printed for you the first 10 pages of a 123-page guidance document. You can see it was written by more than a dozen Fish and Wildlife Service and micro people, okay? Let me just read, if you'll turn to the tab, let me just read it, part of it. This implementation plan should begin immediately to prevent further introduction and to stop the spread of Asian carp. Goal 1, prevent accidental and deliberate unauthorized introductions of silver carp. Goal 2, contain and control the expansion of the bighead and grass carp into the United States. In other words, prevent their spread. MICRA has a separate guidance document, and let me read what they add to that. The most cost-effective management approach is preventing the introduction and establishment of Asian carp into uninhabited waters. Prevention efforts are warranted to avoid potential adverse impacts, and it is more viable than attempting to manage and control them in place. That comes from MICRA. TWRA is only working to reduce recruitment and placing deterrents behind them and fish out the carp from infested lakes. I agree with the need to do that 100%, but not at the expense of allowing the silver carp to enter our 4 uninhabited lakes. TWRA admitted this plan will not prevent them from reaching us. The guidance you have in your hand states clearly the most important thing to do is to do everything possible to prevent them from accessing unoccupied lakes. TWRA is not following that guidance. You have the guidance. And for TWRA to say they are, I will use their words, is categorically false. Why is this commission allowing TWRA to ignore the guidance, allow the silver carp to swim freely into our lakes? They plan to put deterrents behind the lakes. This defies the guidance. Deterrents must be first placed in front of the carp to prevent them, just as the guidance says. Why is this commission not asking TWRA to follow this guidance and do everything possible to prevent them from reaching our 4 unoccupied lakes? TWRA and this commission have only addressed carp-filled lakes, and I agree with every effort that is being done to help those lakes, but you're ignoring the small region, well, it's actually a large region, the 4 lakes that have no carp. We are very lucky. They haven't reached us yet, but there is no action whatsoever to prevent them from reaching our lakes. Deterrence behind them allows them to reach our lakes, and TWRA has admitted that. Why is that happening? Why isn't any effort at all being placed to address the fact that we don't have the carp and to prevent them from reaching our lakes? Instead of having to then find funding.
Thank you, Dr.
No,
Joseph.
I want to. And
Dr. Joseph, you're well over 3 minutes already.
Well, you know what?
I'm sorry, Dr. Joseph, I don't think there's a person on this committee who hadn't heard or read
but you
numerous
don't
correspondence
answer
from
these
you,
questions.
Dr. Joseph, and even heard from you at public meetings.
Can you please answer the question?
Any further business come before this meeting? Move to adjourn.